Next presenter is Dave Greene. Dave, come and tell us about your last year's trip, and then a little bit about things you do for the community back where you live on the paddling front.
I get the nervous poops. It's a real thing, but when it's showtime, right? Showtime. Again, my name's Dave Greene. And this past summer, my paddling partner, myself, Chris Giard, he's in the crowd somewhere. Chris, where are you?
Over here.
There he is. Awesome. We undertook a big canoe trip this summer, and we paddled from Yellowknife to Baker Lake. It was an extraordinary trip, and all the details I'm not going to share with you today, but I will highlight parts of it. There's a saying that says you're either rich in time or money, and we're rich really in neither of them. So we got some assistance from some of our friends, as you can see up here on the picture, and we made most use of the time that we had. We traveled quickly, yes, but that was part of the intention. That was the point. Back home, where I live now, as an elementary school teacher, I also run a not-for-profit organization called Night of Adventure. And the idea there is that we explore the human spirit through storytelling. And by doing that, we build community. And we're doing exactly the same thing here today. And I want to give a big thank you to Alec and Erica and all the volunteers who are continuing the tradition now. Thank you. It's that act of storytelling that brings us all together. It's a fabric. It's a piece of fabric, it's a piece of yarn that intertwines between all of us. Whether I share the stage with you up here today, or you're in the audience, you don't need to be Dick Irwin or Bob O'Hara. You don't need to travel thousands of kilometers. If you are picking up your paddle, it can be as simple as going out by yourself and canoeing the same lake you paddle every single day. You are part of the story. You are part of the culture, and you are part of the identity that we have as Canadians, which is so important to us. And central to that identity is, of course, the canoe. I can't touch on everything that we did this summer, but if you are looking for more information, Chris Giard over here wrote up a trip report from Lutzel Cay to Whitefish Lake via the Snowdrift River. It's now available on my CCR. You can go read it there. I also wrote up a full trip report for RCGS, which I'm happy to share with you personally if you reach out to me afterwards. There's also more information through this Night of Adventure platform, which I run out of Halifax. We do many things. We're many things, including an adventure grant. Over the last couple of years, I've given away over $10,000 supporting 17 grassroots expeditions or adventures in Atlantic Canada. Unfortunately, for you, maybe in the future, all those grants are only available to Atlantic Canadians right now, because that's where I sell the tickets. But maybe there'll be a Night of Adventure in Toronto in the future, and we can expand on that. But we are many things, and through that I've created a podcast. And if you go to the podcast, it's readily available wherever you stream these things, Spotify or Apple Music. There's some great interviews in there with names you'll recognize, such as David and Leah Jackson, Mike Ranta, Noah Booth from Northern Scavenger. But I've developed this podcast here, and it's a 3-part series, and if you want more information on our trip this summer, you can listen to it in full there. There's an overview of the trip, there's a day in the life on expedition, and then of course there's more information on the portage, the infamous McDonald Fault portage. Now before I carry on with my story, I want to pay homage to the people who walked the land and the trails before us. There's of course the indigenous people who walked the land for longer than time itself. There are the pioneers, the people at the beginning of the 20th century whose writing inspired all of us to first go out and explore not just the wilderness and our backyards, but what we're really doing out there is exploring ourselves. We're learning about ourselves as we travel through the land. Although other people have been there before, that doesn't mean that we have. And as we travel through these new places, we're really just exploring ourselves. The R.M. Pattersons, the Elliot Merritts, and the Mina Hubbards of the world, just to name a few, they inspired all of us. We still read their writings. It's remarkable. And then there's those who kept the dream alive. These guys were paddling. They were running the routes when I was born, prior to when I was born. And it's their books, it's their writings. Alex, this was Alex Hall. I found this scribed into a cabin in Warden's Grove this summer. We'll hear more about Alex today, I'm sure. Herb Pohl, George Lusty, Stu Coffin, of course. We followed in Stu's footsteps many times. We call it the Stu Coffin crossover. There's a famous, is definitely the wrong word, Portage and Labrador. And then there's Herb, of course, The Lure of Faraway Places. I've read this book more times than any other book, hands down. I love it, absolutely love it. It's inspiring. Just the words and descriptions of the land and the routes that he followed. To follow in Herb's footsteps is truly an honor. And then, of course, there's my mentors. I wouldn't be standing here in front of you today if it wasn't for people such as Frank Wolf and, of course, the wonderful Eva Kinklova. I thank those mentors for taking me underneath their wing and teaching me everything that I know. So this trip that I conducted this summer with Chris, this was really stepping out for myself. It was finding myself in the independence of doing it alone, away from those mentors, and finding my way through the process of planning and executing and discovering more about myself. Now, I'm not a religious man, a spiritual man, or much of really a superstitious man, but when I go out on the land, all of that changes. All of that goes out the window. We all know about the wind, especially in the north. If there's any sailors in the room, you know that we don't talk about the wind in front of the wind. I also don't collect bones when I'm out there. I love seeing them, but I also recognize they're important feed for the small animals in the wintertime. As much as I would love to have a wolf skull in my collection, I also don't need a curse following me down the river. I spread tobacco in the water, give a silent prayer every morning, or before every rapid, or absolutely before every big crossing on a lake. Put tobacco in the water, think to myself, we travel quietly, we travel efficiently, we just want to pass through this land as we are only visitors. If we truly wanted to see a place and get to know a place and see the way the light shines on the water or the rocks or the trees, you would need to be the spruce tree. You need to be in one place for a full year, 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. We don't really see the land. We only see what it allows us to see. Well, as we traveled through Lutzoke, we met an elder. And he said to us, before you drink from the rivers and the lakes, take the water into your mouth, spit it out, cleanse. Take the water into your mouth, spit it out, cleanse again. And on the third time, take the water into your mouth and drink. You will be refreshed and it will hydrate you the way that you're seeking it to. And of course, superstitions. If you want it to rain, pack away your raincoat. If you want the sun to come out, pack away your sunglasses. It was our intentions on this trip to travel fast, efficiently, and quietly through the land. I know this style of trip is not for everybody. It's not intended to be. But we needed to make the most use of our time, and we wanted to travel. We wanted to be part of the landscape. We wanted to become equals with the flora and the fauna, with the inanimate objects, the rocks and the trees and the water. We wanted to become one with it, and that was our intentions. And I think this type of tripping is okay, as long as those intentions are made clear with the group before you leave. Now you might ask, what's in a name? The Akilineq Canoe Expedition. Many of you will know that the word Akilineq refers to a geographical place, the Akilineq Hills, which is an Inuit word. But the Akilineq Hills are located north of Beverly Lake. And so traditionally a meeting place for the indigenous people of the area. Translated into English, it refers to the land on the other side of water, or the water on the other side of land. And reference to our trip, it refers to the Theon River, which was on the other side of land. We needed to reach it from our starting point in Yellowknife. Also worth mentioning, as I've done before, is my paddling partner, Chris Jarrett. If any of you get the honor to go on a trip with Chris, consider yourself lucky. He was born in the wrong century. He can fix anything. He loves to wear wool pants. If you see his beard, you'll know what I'm talking about. I started growing mine out 6 months ago, just so I could fit into the crowd. No, I'm just kidding, I always have a beard. A great guy though, great expedition partner, great attitude, and most of all, he wants to be there all the time no matter what. Rain, snow, wind, does not matter. He wants to be there. And that's the most important thing if you want to find success in these big, long trips. You need to want to be there no matter what. Now our trip, we traveled a huge distance, as you can see up here. We covered over 1,600 kilometers in 42 days. It was a hard trip. You know that. I'm preaching to the converted. That was the point, though. We're young, we're strong, and we can. So we did. Right off the bat, as we traveled south from Yellowknife, we had Great Slave Lake. I assure you, much tobacco was spread in the water, asking for safe passage as we went. I'm sure many of you have paddled on this Great Lake before, but as we paddled south, we passed places on the map such as Cabin Islands, Dry Bone Bay, and of course Matonabee Point, where the fetch of the entire lake makes these huge cliffs. It's a very, very intimidating place. We learned one of our first lessons only 3 days into the trip, and that is when you're up in the north and you're paddling on Great Lakes, it would benefit you to paddle at night. We gained a fantastic weather window because, as you can see here, we needed to travel from the north shore of Great Slave Lake to the islands on the south shore in order to reach our destination of Lutzoke. And in order to do that, there's a number of consecutive crossings which you need to make to the Caribou Islands and then the West Head Islands, Blanchard, and then south. And we got a fantastic weather window on the 4th day as we paddled southeast. And we seized that opportunity, paddling through the night, successfully making these crossings safely. And whether that was skill, hard work, or the offerings that we made to the land, I do not know. But we did make it safely. As we traveled along the south shore of the lake, we eventually made it to our only community of the trip, being Lutzoke. And here is where we entered a fantastic place that has recently been recognized by the government as Thea Denenene. It's Canada's newest national park reserve. There it is, Thea Denenene. So it's Canada's newest national park reserve, and it represents, for the Dene people of the Northwest Territories, a place of tradition, a place of hunting, and a place of travel. It was a really interesting place for us, and to transect it, we would travel all the way through it, from the beginning, from the western side to the eastern side. Through here, we traveled from Lutzoke. This is the part of the trip that I will try to share with you the most, that I think will be the most interesting to you, because Great Slave Lake is well documented. The middle and lower Thelon River is well documented. We could have traveled across Pikes Portage, up Artillery, and into the Hanbury. But to be completely honest with you, we wanted to save that route in particular for future travels, whether that be the Back River, the Copper Mine, or any thousands of opportunities to go north. We wanted to save that route. So we looked elsewhere, and we looked for other places to go. So I heard about this route that we could take via the Snowdrift River into Whitefish Lake, our ultimate source of Thelon River. And we got fantastic notes from a gentleman named John McGinnis. John, thank you for your information. It was very important to us. As well as Frank Wolf, a mentor of mine, had traveled through this area a number of years previous. As we left Lutzoke, we traveled through a number of lakes on the south side of Great Slave, starting with Stark Lake, working our way through Lawson to Chitwa, portaging up into Mid-Lake and Meridian. This route here is a traditional travelway for the Indigenous people, reaching for the Barrens, usually in the wintertime. And as we went, we were following mostly snowmobile trails through these portages. And a snowmobile trail might be fantastic in the wintertime, but not so much in the summer. It was considerable work coming through here, but again, you already know this. Burnt over forests, berries everywhere, blueberries, strawberries. It was a place of plenty. And the number of muskrats that we saw going through here was mind-blowing. It really let us feel like we were becoming part of the landscape. As we worked our way across this traditional route, we made our way into Meridian Lake, where the McDonald Fault portage begins. And the McDonald Fault, it's a geographical fault that runs east to west along the south side of Great Slave Lake. And we needed to get over the top of it into a tributary to the Snowdrift River. From there, it was from Daisy, Dion, Roberts. We followed the trails and the trip reports from John McGinnis, leading us through. And as we went, there's the signposts of the north, the blazes cut into trees, showing us the way to go. Plastic pieces of runners laying on the ground from travelers in the winter. But the further and further we followed this route along, once we left Meridian Lake, the signs of human presence slowly disappeared. So the very last sign that we saw was a ginger ale can sitting on the ground in the middle of nowhere. And we scratched our heads about it for weeks, talking like, how did that ginger ale can get there? And you know what, Chris, I finally concluded somebody probably threw it out of a plane window. Honestly, it's the only way it could have gotten there. We eventually made our way up to the Snowdrift River. It's known as the Snowdrift River to the indigenous people because that is where the snow would collect in the wintertime and the traditional route to the Barrens. But I think it could be known also as the Sandrift River. Because in the lower parts, before the Elaine confluence, as we traveled upstream, it was sand everywhere. We had sand in our tent, and sand in our pants, and sand in our sandwiches, and sand in our breakfast. Sand, sand, sand. I like to refer to it as the Sandrift River. But as we travel upstream, it's one of these remarkable things, and those of you who have done it before, you know this. Traveling upstream is remarkable. It forces you to slow down. It forces you to work with the land. We know we can't fight the river. You'll never win if you fight the water. You need to follow those eddies, working your way from one bank to the other, catching those little spots in behind the rocks, traveling very, very slowly. But it also allows us to see things we wouldn't normally see. We've had over the years some of our greatest wildlife experiences while traveling up rivers. It was no different here. We had very close encounters with muskox sleeping on the bank of the river that we would startle as we would slowly be creeping up. And then there was one day where we were coming up the river and in complete silence, we're going on for a couple of hours, and we startled these animals. We first thought they were lynx, and they come out of the bank above us, and they scramble their way along, and they pop up over the side, and we realized that, no, they're actually wolf pups. They're wolf pups. So we stop, we pause in the middle of the river, and stupidly, we work our way over, and we nose the front of the canoe right in underneath where we'd seen the wolf pups. And I turn around, I'm sitting in the bow that day, and I look at Chris, and I say, Chris, how's your wolf howl these days? And he's like, I don't know. So we listened to them. We could hear the chorus of wolves howling in the forest behind the bank. He listens for a second, and he goes, and he gives out his best wolf howl. Ow! Right when he does that, I instinctively turn my head back up. I look up the river, and there she is. Charging down the bank directly at us. I only had time to put my paddle on the bank and push us off back out into the current. And she was there. She was right there. And you know how it is. You're very small when you're sitting in the front of the canoe, and she's up on a bank, and this is not your average puppy. She's a big dog. She's coming right at us. And by the time I pushed that canoe off the bank, I could have reached out with my paddle and touched her. She was right there. She didn't raise a lip at us, she didn't growl at us, she didn't lunge or bark at us. She was just, I think, insisting, protecting, perhaps, her young. We drifted back out into the middle of the river and we stayed there for a while. An hour, maybe two, I don't know. Again, much tobacco was put into the water as an offering. And we sat there. We eventually drifted over to the other bank and we sat there and we spent a lot of time with her. And she sat, and eventually she relaxed. She became more like a domesticated dog. Her tail went down, her ears went back, she sat down, and eventually she became very relaxed. All the while, the choruses of the wolves howling from the back, from the forest behind. Again, we were becoming part of the landscape. As we continued traveling upstream, as we continued traveling north, we passed the confluence of the Elaine River, a popular route in and out of Whitefish Lake. As we passed the Elaine confluence, the character of the river changed completely. The sand disappeared altogether, and we were left with rock. As you can see, often more rock than water. We had very little information to go on through this section, but it had been known or told to us that it was impossible, that you couldn't do it. Nobody paddled that section because there was no water. Now, was that true? Kind of. Was it impossible? No. Did we end up portaging as much as we paddled? Yes. But we did, in fact, eventually make it. We made it up to the top of the Snowdrift River to a place called Sandy Lake, where the Eskers in the North Country comes in again. And it was here that we had our second or third or fourth or fifth amazing wildlife encounter. We had a tailwind this day as we cruised down Sandy Lake, 25 kilometers long, only a couple hundred meters wide, with eskers intersecting the lake in different places. So the depth of the lake would go from who knows how deep to only a few feet, and we would have to drag our canoe over and continue on. And as we're paddling down the lake, Chris says, what's that animal running down the shoreline there? And it had this like Conor McGregor eloping kind of thing going on. We're like, that's obviously a bear. And the bear came out, it was very curious about us, and it came around, it sat on the beach, it stood on its hind legs, it sat down, it was smelling us. It's like, what is that big yellow thing out there? It circled around kind of and came out behind us and started walking out in the lake towards us. This is about when I started putting my camera away, and Chris turns to me, he's in the bow that day, and he says, hey Dave, how fast do bears swim? And so I look down in the water beside me, and it's only about 2 feet deep, and I say, Chris, he doesn't have to swim, he's gonna walk right on over here. So we do the things, and it kind of goes back to shore and kind of watches us. But we're at the very east end of the lake now, we have no choice, we need to camp there. So we do, and we carry on. We carry on with our day. As wanting to be part of the land, we didn't bring a gun with us. We think all those things I told you about superstitions and being spiritual and putting tobacco in the water, that if we showed respect for the land would therefore show respect back to us. And it was true. The next morning as we packed up, we made our way to the Heideland Portage, a series of lakes and walks that would take you from Sandy Lake into Whitefish. We were unloading the boat, and I turn around and I see 2 cubs on the opposite end of the bay running down and saying, Chris, look, there's two bear cubs running down the beach. And then at the same time, the same bear that we had seen the day before comes over the top of the ridge. Who knows if she'd come to visit us in the night? I don't really know. Don't really care to know. But there she was. Again, though, she was not threatening. She was not threatening towards us. Just maybe letting us know that this was her home. As we worked our way over the Heideland Portage here, it was a remarkable place, filled with animal tracks of all different kinds of variety everywhere we went. We even saw signs of humans as we traveled through there. There's an old trapper who lived up in that area, Gus DeHost. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He lived up in there, and as we were traveling along, we found signs of him, even finding an old cache of his and the stern plates and the gunnels of one of his old canoes that had disappeared over time. But as you know, the rate of decomposition in the north is very slow. Gus obviously thought he was coming back to his canoe one day. Again, it was these people that walked the trails in the lands before us that inspired us to go forth and see it for ourselves. As we walked this Heideland Portage from Sandy Lake, the trees completely disappeared behind us. We were left in the barrens. It was quite remarkable. For Chris and myself, it was our first time experiencing the true barren lands. Overwhelming is an understatement. Not only that, but as we traveled through, as many of you saw this summer, the wildfires became part of our existence. They were springing up all around us. I had no idea that a wildfire could burn on the barren lands, but I tell you, they certainly can. It was from here that we were in the upper headwaters of the Thelon River, and from here on out, if you want information, there's plenty of it available. But the upper Thelon River, I know, is rarely traveled because it's difficult to get to. It is the land of eskers. Beautiful place, beautiful camping. The river is gentle, interspersed with rapids, and it allows you to run those fun parts. Again, it allowed us to become part of the land, to become equals with that flora and fauna. As we traveled through here, the time started to pass away, and the end of our trip started to near closer. We finally, on day 39, took a rest day and allowed our feet to guide us as opposed to our paddles guide us. It was amazing to be able to walk around the eskers, to take pictures, to wander around in our own thoughts. It was here, after passing through the lower Thelon, across Aberdeen, Beverly, Aberdeen, and then Schultz, that we found this equilibrium which we'd been searching for. As we paddled down the east side of Schultz Lake, there was a moment when the clouds and the waves and the wind and ourselves were all traveling in different directions. It was very confusing at first. How is this even possible? But with little effort, with much ease, we sliced our way through there. And it was at that moment that we realized that we had truly, in fact, become part of the land. We'd become equals with the flora and fauna that we sought to become equals with. And then, of course, I digress for a second here. Our only regret from the trip was not running the Thelon Canyon. It was record low water levels this year. If there ever was a year that you could have safely, you could have floated a pool toy through the Thelon Canyon this summer. But we had heeded the advice from others and accepted the portage as the right thing to do, only going back to scout afterwards, realizing that we could have floated through it. We saw the fauna. We became part of the landscape. We finished the trip. We did eventually make it to Baker Lake. And it was here, and many of you know, and I was talking recently on a phone call with Pat Ludis, and he likened these long trips to a life upon itself. The first day of the trip being a birth, the trip itself being a complete lifespan onto its own. And then, of course, there's the worst day of the trip. Does anybody know what the worst day of the trip is? It's the last day. We did ultimately make it to our goal, and we sped up a little bit because we had an opportunity to meet one of our mentors who was also ending their trip in Baker Lake at the same time with us. It was a true honor for us to end up in Baker Lake and sit with our friend. Chris is an expert napper, by the way. He seizes every opportunity he could get. Eva. Worst day of the trip. It's the death. It's the end. You lose your routine. You're going back to places like this, which is not exactly where we thrive. The end of a project, of all the work, of the planning, of the execution, it is the end. But these days come, and that's okay, because there's dreams. There's the writings of the people of the past. There's all of you who inspire all of us to plan again, to pick up those maps, to come up the routes, to pull together the team, to plan the food, to do all those things. We cannot pretend we don't like the planning, because we do. If we didn't, we wouldn't do it. Through this platform that I keep mentioning, Night of Adventure, and as an elementary teacher, I want to inspire those generations that come before us. So through this trip, I've developed an education plan, which is available for students from primary, you call it kindergarten here, to grade 6. And through that, I've developed 10 educational videos that are now available on YouTube, all about common things that you and I are experts on, but an 8-year-old wouldn't know. You can learn about what paddles we brought, the clothing we wore, the food that we packed, what is a portage, what is a tump line. And with that, I've developed a number of lesson plans that are all available. They're free. I'm not looking to make money. I just want to get it in the hands of children and inspire them to know that they are capable of doing far more than they think they are. So that they know that failure is a crucial part of learning. So that they can go forth and see these wild places and discover more things about themselves. For all of those videos, there's lesson plans attached to them that are free and available through Google Drive, with worksheets that a teacher could pick up, take into their classroom, show them the videos, and then have students do the lessons with them too, to make it an interactive experience. So I hope some of what I've said to you today has inspired you to go forth and plan these big trips. Thank you very much.